Why you wouldn't last a day in medieval times, the harsh reality revealed. Think your morning commute is rough. Try waking up with your boots frozen to the floor because your entire house is basically an icebox. It's dawn, and you're a medieval peasant shivering on a straw mattress that smells like wet hay. You pull your thin woolen blanket tighter, but it's not helping. The wind howls through the cracks in your wooden walls, and somewhere in the corner a rat scurries over your only loaf of bread. You can see your own breath hanging in the air. Because yes, it's colder inside your house than it is outside. You sit up and realize your boots are literally stuck to the floor, frozen solid. Great, another day in paradise. We love to romanticize the medieval era, don't we? Castles, chivalry, brave knights riding into battle. But trust me, you wouldn't last a day. Today we're diving into the brutal, bizarre, and surprisingly creative ways medieval people survived daily life. Spoiler alert, it was more rats, dirt, and desperation than knights and dragons. From weird sleep schedules and questionable food choices to hygiene habits that would make your skin crawl, we're about to find out why surviving just one day in the medieval world would be your toughest challenge yet. The nightmare of medieval sleep. Alright, so you survived the morning freeze, barely. Now let's talk about sleep, or whatever passed for sleep back then. Spoiler, it wasn't restful, cozy, or remotely comfortable. Imagine your bed is just a pile of straw tossed into a wooden frame. Sounds kind of rustic, right? Now, add in the fact that this straw hasn't been changed in months, maybe even years. It's not just straw anymore, it's a thriving ecosystem. Bugs, fleas, maybe a few mice. Basically, your bed is more alive than you are after a long day of manual labor. And it wasn't just peasants. Even the wealthier folks had their own mattress nightmares. In one real-life story, a nobleman who was forced to sleep in a peasant's bed complained for weeks about sneezing constantly, because the hay was so dusty and filthy. Imagine trying to fall asleep while sneezing every few minutes. Luxury living, medieval edition. But the beds weren't the only weird part of sleep. There was also this thing called segmented sleep, or first sleep, and second sleep. The idea was simple. You'd sleep for a few hours, wake up in the middle of the night for an hour or two, maybe pray, eat a snack, or, if you were feeling particularly romantic, have a little medieval cuddle time, then go back to sleep for a few more hours. Why? Well, partly because nights were long and cold, and partly because life was so exhausting that falling asleep early was pretty much mandatory. Plus, with no artificial light, the darkness just stretched on forever. So, imagine this. It's like camping without any of the fun. No cozy sleeping bag, no s'mores, and instead of a few mosquitoes, you've got a colony of bedbugs. Your tent? A drafty wooden shack with rats running through your bedding. Sleep was more about surviving the night than actually resting. And if you think a bad night's sleep was the worst part, wait till you see how they handled hunger. The struggle for food. Alright, you've somehow made it through the night without freezing solid or becoming a midnight snack for a rat. Now it's time for breakfast. Sounds good, right? Well, don't get too excited. On the medieval menu today, gruel, basically a watery oatmeal made from whatever grains you could scrape together. If you're lucky, there might be a piece of stale, rock-hard bread on the side. Maybe some salted pork, if you're living large. Most of the time, though, it's just the gruel. Think of it as medieval meal prep, minus the kale and quinoa, the world's saddest, coldest porridge. And no, there's no honey drizzle or fancy toppings. You're eating this because it's literally the only thing standing between you and starvation. But hey, you can't just eat fresh food all the time, mainly because there isn't any. So medieval folks got creative with food preservation. They used salt to cure meat, dried everything they could get their hands on, and fermented vegetables in barrels. The result? Food that didn't spoil right away, but probably tasted like regret. Also, there was always that slight chance that the meat was a little too old. And if that doesn't sound risky enough, let's talk about starvation and famine. The Great Famine of First Re 151317 hit Europe hard. Imagine endless rain ruining crops year after year. Villages went from struggling to starving. People were so desperate they ate cats, dogs, and in some, especially bleak cases, each other. Yeah, it got that bad. Imagine a world where running out of snack means literal starvation. Not just having to settle for plain chips instead of nacho cheese. You couldn't just order in or hit the grocery store. If the harvest failed, you didn't eat. Period. And the desperation wasn't just in remote villages. Even cities with markets were running dry. And when food wasn't killing them, medieval hygiene was doing its best to finish the job. Medieval hygiene horror. Congratulations, you survived a medieval night's sleep and found something vaguely edible for breakfast. Now let's talk about staying clean, or rather, not staying clean. First off, let's bust a myth. Medieval people did bathe, just not as often as you'd hope. Bathing wasn't totally unheard of, especially among the wealthy. Public bathhouses existed in some towns, but here's the catch. They were often shared by everyone and doubled as social spaces. So yes, you could get clean, along with 20 other strangers soaking in the same questionable water. And if you weren't lucky enough to live near a bathhouse, your hygiene routine might involve splashing yourself with cold river water once in a blue moon. In fact, by the later Middle Ages, bathing became even less common because some people thought it could make you sick. The logic was, if I wash too much, I might catch a disease. Spoiler, they caught diseases anyway. Now let's move on to toilets, or the medieval idea of toilets. Basically, you had chamber pots inside your house. When it was full, you'd open a window, or if you were feeling ambitious, step outside and just toss it out. That's right, it wasn't just rain that could fall from the sky. Sometimes walking through town meant dodging a flying bucket of, well, you get the idea. If you lived in a more sophisticated area, you might have access to a public latrine, essentially a row of wooden seats over a pit that may or may not have been cleaned in the last decade. Imagine sitting shoulder to shoulder with your neighbors while doing your business. Comforting, right? And then there were the plague doctors, those creepy beak masks. People thought that stuffing them with herbs and spices would protect them from diseases. Newsflash, it didn't. The plague doctors looked like sinister birds, but their masks were more about blocking the stench than actually saving lives. In reality, they didn't help much beyond terrifying everyone they passed. Basically, imagine sharing a bathroom with 50 roommates who don't know what soap is and who sometimes just throw their chamber pot contents right into the hallway. Hygiene? More like a medieval experiment in how dirty you can get before something eats you. But filth wasn't the only problem. They also had to worry about keeping their homes from literally falling apart. Survival in a crumbling house. Alright, so you've somehow managed to survive medieval sleep and hygiene. Now, let's talk about where you're living. Spoiler alert, it's not exactly a cozy cottage from a fairy tale. Most medieval homes were made from a combination of mud, wood and straw. Basically whatever was lying around. Forget about solid brick or stone unless you were wealthy. The average peasant house was a glorified mud hut. And insulation? Yeah, good luck with that. In the winter, your house didn't keep the cold out, it just gave it a new place to settle in. When it rained, the water seeped in through the walls and the thatched roof. You'd wake up to muddy puddles on your floor, or worse, find your straw mattress soaking wet. In some cases, the roof would collapse under the weight of snow or heavy rain, and if the walls didn't hold up, well, your house could literally fall apart. To deal with the drafts and the dampness, people got creative. They'd hang animal skins over the windows to block the wind, or stuff the cracks with extra straw and rags. Picture this, your walls are basically a patchwork of fur, straw and mud, desperately trying to keep nature from barging in. Sometimes they'd use dried dung as a sort of plaster, because, hey, anything to keep the wind out. Imagine living in a house that's one gust away from turning into a pile of sticks. You're not just trying to survive the winter, you're also hoping your home doesn't decide to quit halfway through. And when the rain wasn't pouring in, the mud from the floor would stick to your feet, so walking around meant taking your house with you. And if the weather didn't bring you down, there was always the next big problem, staying warm. So you've somehow kept your house from collapsing, but now winter is here, and you're in trouble. Back in medieval times, keeping warm wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a matter of survival. There was no central heating, no cozy fireplaces in every room, and definitely no heated blankets. Instead, peasants relied on layering up a lot. Multiple tunics, wool cloaks, and whatever scraps of fabric they could find. You'd think it was a fashion statement, but really, it was just desperation couture. When nighttime came, staying warm meant the whole family piling into one bed like a medieval sleeping burrito. It wasn't just for warmth, it was for survival. Everyone bundled together, sometimes even with livestock if it was really cold. Picture mum, dad, 4 kids and a goat, all crammed into one straw mattress, breathing in each other's warmth and probably a good dose of barnyard smell. But sometimes no amount of layering could save you from the cold. Frostbite was a real threat. There are stories of peasants waking up to find their toes frozen solid, literally stuck to the floor because the moisture in the room had turned to ice overnight. Imagine falling asleep, bundled up, and waking up wondering why your toes feel like tiny blocks of wood. That's right, they froze. And you thought your heating bill was bad. Back then, the bill was paid in frostbite. If you were lucky enough to have a fireplace, the heat barely reached past the hearth. The rest of the room stayed icy, and anyone not directly next to the fire was basically on their own. Surviving winter wasn't just about being tough. It was about enduring cold that felt more like a personal attack. And when the cold didn't get them, sometimes other people did. Dealing with violence. Alright, so you've survived the freezing night and made it through breakfast without freezing your toes off. Now let's talk about another daily threat. Violence. Because in medieval times, danger didn't just come from the weather. It also came from other people. First off, feudal conflicts were like pop-up wars that could happen anytime, anywhere. If two lords decided they didn't like each other that day, guess what? Their knights and soldiers would turn your village into a battlefield. You'd be minding your own business, just trying to feed the chickens, and suddenly you're in the middle of a skirmish. Arrows flying, swords clashing, your neighbor Bob running for his life. And it wasn't just noblemen causing chaos. Bandits were everywhere, especially on lonely roads between towns. Traveling from one village to another was basically like signing up for a medieval survival challenge. You could get robbed, beaten, or even kidnapped if you weren't careful. Sometimes staying put was just as risky as leaving. How did people defend themselves? Well, there was no organized police force. You had to rely on personal defense. Crude weapons like pitchforks, clubs, and whatever sharp object you could find were your best bet. If you couldn't fight, you could try shouting loud enough to scare someone off. Medieval intimidation tactics. Back off, or I'll yell at you really loud. There's even a record of one village that managed to fight off a group of raiders using nothing but farm tools. Picture it. Angry peasants wielding rakes, pitchforks and buckets, charging at armored soldiers. They're just defending their prized cabbages. Guess what? It actually worked. Sometimes sheer desperation beat out better weapons. So yeah, dealing with violence wasn't just about being strong, it was about being resourceful, loud, and sometimes just plain lucky. And if marauders didn't kill you, the wildlife just might. Beasts of the medieval wild. Surviving medieval life wasn't just about dodging raiders and surviving the cold. Sometimes nature itself seemed determined to finish you off. Let's start with the dangerous animals. Wolves were a constant threat, especially in rural areas. A pack of hungry wolves could wipe out your livestock, or even take a swipe at you if you were caught out alone at night. Then there were wild boars, basically angry hairy tanks that could gore you without a second thought. And if you were really unlucky, you might even encounter a bear while out foraging. Yep, that's right. One wrong turn and suddenly you're face to face with something that views you as a snack. But it wasn't just the big beasts. Pests were just as relentless. Rats infested homes, especially where food was stored. And if you thought the rats were bad, wait until you learnt about the fleas they carried, tiny little plague factories. Then there was the constant companion no one wanted, slice. They didn't just show up occasionally, they were practically part of the family. And since we're talking about rats, let's dive into the medieval version of pest control, rat myths. One popular belief was that sprinkling urine around the house would deter rodents. Who knows, maybe they thought the smell would mark territory. Others hung bunches of herbs like mint or tansy in doorways, hoping rats would be scared off by the scent. And then there was the ultimate solution, cat armies. Villages sometimes kept dozens of cats, purely for rodent control. It was less of a cute pet thing and more of a furry clawed military unit. Imagine trying to sleep while knowing your bedroom has the same guest list as a nature documentary. Wolves howling outside, rats running across the floor, fleas biting your ankles, and a cat army lazily lounging in the corner, just waiting for a rat to make a move. Sleep tight. And if the animals didn't take you out, the social rules just might. Social survival. If you somehow managed to survive the wildlife, the cold, and the random acts of violence, you still had to deal with the biggest threat of all, other people. Medieval society wasn't just harsh, it was rigid. You couldn't just speak your mind or make your own choices. Everything was about hierarchy. At the top, you had the king and his nobles, and at the bottom, peasants like you. If you disobeyed a lord or even looked at them the wrong way, that could be considered disrespect. And disrespect wasn't just frowned upon, it could be a death sentence. Imagine your boss having the power to literally execute you because you didn't smile enough during tax collection. And if the lords weren't terrifying enough, there was always the paranoia of accusations. One wrong word or strange behavior, and you could be branded a witch. Maybe your crops failed, or your cows stopped giving milk. Obviously, it's not bad luck, it's that weird neighbor with the herbal remedies. Suddenly, the whole village is dragging her to a makeshift trial, where logic goes out the window and fear takes the wheel. It's like living in a reality show where anyone can vote you off the island, or straight to the gallows. One day you're the local healer, and the next day you're accused of hexing the miller's corn. No evidence required, just gossip and fear. Surviving medieval social life wasn't just about keeping your body safe, it was about keeping your reputation intact. One rumor could mean the difference between blending in or being burned at the stake. And with all these challenges, it's no wonder people found some pretty strange ways to cope, skills being used, coping mechanisms. All right, after surviving the cold, the violence, the animals, and the rigid social rules, how did medieval people keep their sanity? The short answer? Coping mechanisms. One of the most common ways to escape the misery of medieval life? Alcohol. Drinking wasn't just for fun, it was a way to numb the harsh realities. Taverns were more than just drinking spots, they were social hubs where people gathered to forget their troubles, swap stories, and maybe even sing a horribly off-key song or two. If your day consisted of back-breaking labor and constant fear of disease, a mug of ale was basically your therapy session. And while they were drinking, they were also storytelling. Tales of heroes, myths, local legends, anything to make life feel a little more interesting. It wasn't just entertainment, it was how they connected, kept traditions alive, and made sense of the chaos around them. Then there was superstition. When your house could collapse, your food might kill you, and the local lord could execute you for sneezing too loudly, you needed something to hold on to. Charms, rituals, and prayers weren't just about faith, they were about control. Maybe if you hung enough garlic or carved the right symbol into your doorframe, the bad luck would pass you by. And believe it or not, they had humor, dark, sarcastic, and often a bit twisted. Joking about death, poking fun at the local lord behind his back, and making light of their miserable conditions were all part of surviving. They might have been poor, cold, and half-starved, but they still managed to laugh. Because honestly, when life is that absurd, what else can you do? Final reflection. Maybe they didn't thrive, but they sure as hell survived. They were resilient, creative, and knew how to find moments of joy, even when life seemed relentlessly bleak. They took whatever life threw at them and kept moving forward, one cold, muddy, rat-little day at a time. Which medieval survival hack surprised you the most? Would you drink ale to forget the cold, or pile on every piece of clothing you own? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed stepping into the gritty, weird world of medieval life, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories that don't feel like homework